Everybody, the webinar will begin very shortly. We'll just wait a few seconds for everybody to join. So good afternoon, everybody, from a rather grey London this afternoon, but I know we have people joining us from all around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, or maybe even good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I'm Siobhan Bonita, and I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is the publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. And in terms of today's topic, so this is a really exciting webinar. It's slightly different from a lot of the webinars that we do. So this is all about, the title is More Than Just a Numbers Game, How and Why to Achieve Gender Parity in Public Services. We've got some fantastic speakers with us here today, and I'm going to introduce our three speakers in a moment. But in terms of that topic and what we're going to focus on, so many countries and their governments around the world, they're a long way away yet from reaching gender parity, especially in leadership positions and in their national civil services and public services. And even in those that have achieved it or who have nearly achieved it, it can be rare to find women in the most important and influential roles and in the biggest and most significant departments. And as a number of top civil servants have told Global Government Forum in research that we have conducted, it isn't just about that numbers game when it comes to gender equality. It's also about those roles where women do, the roles that women do, and whether they enjoy the same influence in decision making as their male counterparts. So we've launched a new Global Government Women's Network. It's a community of women from civil and public services around the world. And to kind of kickstart that, we've had one event in Canada already, but this is the first webinar we're having since the launch of that community. We've got three brilliant speakers with us. And those speakers today, they're going to tell us a little bit about their own experiences, about maybe some of the barriers that they and their colleagues have come up against as women as they've gone through their own professional journeys. They're going to share their views on what needs to be done to ensure that women really do have that equal voice around the table when decisions are made, and what some of the knock-on effects on policy decisions maybe are if that isn't the case. And then maybe talk about some good practice that they're aware of. So what are some of the initiatives that are working to help give women the best chances of kind of promotion and fulfilling their own career development goals? After our speakers have spoken, though, this is also your opportunity as our fantastic audience to put your questions to our panel. So on whichever device you are using, you should have a Q&A button somewhere on that device. Please use that button at any time from now on to send in your questions. And we will get through as many of those as we can before the end of today's webinar. And any question at all is valid, and our speakers are here ready to answer your questions. So now to our great speakers. So first, we will hear from Menaz Tabassum, who is a certified project management professional, and she currently serves as IT project manager in the corporate services sector at the Treasury Board Secretariat over in Canada. Menaz is also the co-founder and director of a rapidly growing social enterprise dedicated to addressing food insecurity for individuals facing particular challenges, and this has already benefited over 1,500 community members. And in addition to all of that, Menaz runs her own consultancy where she coaches individuals to help them achieve their career development goals, and she mentors new immigrants in partnership with the Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organisation. We've already had Menaz on one of our webinars, so I know as well that she's going to be fantastic today. And then we will hear from Alice Lunston, who is Head of Demand and Capacity for NHS England. Her journey towards advocating for gender equity began early, for all types of equity, actually, because she served as the Equal Opportunities Officer for her students' union when she herself was studying. And since 2007, she has been a trustee for the charity Kyoto, whose vision is a world in which women, children, and young people can determine their futures free from harm and exploitation. Alice's professional journey spans over 2 decades, starting in the third sector and then moving into healthcare. And alongside her leadership roles, she's an accomplished coach and mentor, helping others with their personal and professional growth. So it's great to have Alice with us here today. And then I'm really pleased to say we head over to South Africa, where we will hear from Zukiswa Molomba, who is National Commissioner at the Public Service Commission in South Africa. She's a senior public sector executive with roots deeply embedded in strategy, economics, and poverty eradication. She's a Mandela Rhodes Scholar and Achieving Scholar and has won international and domestic awards for her leadership in public policy and governance. And amongst many other things, Zukiswa has worked on building meritocratic states, including in recruitment in the public service, as well as looking at strategies on how to deal with corruption and to professionalize the public service. And we also had Zukiswa on one of our webinars on gender issues early, and the audience were really blown away by her passion. So I'm sure we're going to see some of that again here today. So I'm sure the audience will agree with me. We have a fantastic panel. Please do take this opportunity to message in as many of your questions as possible after you've heard our speakers. And with that, I'm going to ask Menaz to give us some opening comments. Over to you, Menaz.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much, Yvonne, for the great introduction. I'm really excited to be here and share my journey with all of you. As you all know, my name is Mehnaz. I'm currently working as an IT project manager with Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, which is the central government agency here in Canada, as well as I'm holding the position of Executive Director of Operations and Partnerships at a nonprofit organization that I co-founded, and I run a small consultancy on the side. So you can tell that I get to meet people from all walks of life throughout my day. I moved to Canada when I was 17 years old. And the first week after I landed was the first time I applied for a job with the government of Canada. But it took me nearly 2.5 years of applying and processing before I started my journey as a public servant at 20 years old. So I started quite early. I've always been very ambitious. And when I moved to Canada with big dreams, not only I was facing challenges as a woman, but also as an immigrant that came with overcoming the language barriers, cultural shocks, and as you may all know, our weather as well. And while my determination and drive got me to break the barriers working in 5 different industries and diverge in unconventional career paths, but with every step as I was moving ahead in my career, the first thing I faced was kind of battling self-doubt and high functioning anxiety among my own self, and especially being the youngest woman in most room and one of the very few immigrant women in the public sector in Canada. I remember my very first mentor, who is a senior executive and also an immigrant. So when I reached out seeking some advice, I remember he told me, if I were you, I would leave this job, go to the private sector and build a career there. Because as a visible minority woman in the public sector, the odds are against you to get you where you want to go. This will hamper your immigration process, your promotions, and everything. So get out while you are young. But funny enough, after a few years, when I got my first leadership role, being the youngest within my department, they were actually the first one to reach out and say that, I'm so glad you didn't listen to me. They were coming from a place of goodness, but they were speaking from their own lived experiences. I grew up in a culture where women are often the ones to eat last and are asked to make a lot of sacrifices and compromises for the sake of everyone. And when I moved to Canada, I thought, well, Canada is doing much better if you see the numbers, right? But I think there is still a lot to be done. And as I went through my journey, I found that out. I recently went to a very similar event like this within my organization, where successful senior women leaders in the public service were sharing their stories. And one of them mentioned how in certain roles, the higher you go, you are bound to sacrifice and compromise your work-life balance. Such apparently doesn't exist. And outside commitment, like forget about it. If you really want to get to that level, you only need to focus on your job. And it kind of struck me, and I was very heartbroken because as an ambitious woman myself, I don't think I'll ever be ready to give up my nonprofit work, right? My public speaking commitments, my family life. So I keep noticing that while the numbers might tell you that gender equality exists and we are doing really better, but as a woman, you are always expected to kind of feed the system, and you're always like kind of told that, okay, in order to get to that level, you have to behave a certain way, especially if you want to take people to take you seriously in your career. So often what happens is I've seen this with myself, like you put your guards up and you begin to lose sight with your authentic self. Another challenge I faced as a young woman in the public sector is when I sit at the decision table, there's very few that not only look like me, but very few women in general, right? And that was very intimidating. When I transitioned from business to STEM, again, similar challenges because no, like I thought that I had to always go the extra mile to prove than my male peers. And I never really understood why, right? You could have the similar background, similar. So it just seemed like a lot of it was like ingrained in the culture and in the system and could be changed, right? Nothing impossible, but it's just why aren't we getting there yet? Being a woman in the world is not easy. I'm sure a lot of you can relate here. We don't have strong policies and accommodations in place to support women. And my ideal society and workplace would be when we start treating all people fairly, right? We need to provide opportunities and value people for the skill set, diverse perspective that they bring to the table, not how they look, what their age, gender, or race is. But sadly, that's not always the case. Um, but early on in my career, I did learn a few things that helped me kind of navigate the path and get me where I am. Firstly, finding the right mentors. Mentors are individuals who are where you'd like to be eventually. So, not necessarily that you must do what your mentors are saying, right? Like I shared the story, sometimes your mentors might just shock you with their own perspective, their own biases. But it really helps to have a strong network of mentors because when they share their story, you can understand what they went through. You can formulate your own strategies with that, but it really helps you to better equip in your career journey. And secondly, and this always comes as a surprise to a lot of people, but saying no to more opportunities than you say yes, it's very important to pick and choose and be intentional about the environment you're putting yourself, right? Like our work takes up about like 8 or more, like almost half of our day. So and it's important, the healthier, if you take care of your own personal well-being, I feel like that helps you better perform and better motivate you in your own career. So I've always been someone who has been very um, picky with where I'm working with, what kind of environment they have set up, and saying no to opportunities even if it's at a higher role, but they don't have, like you can tell by talking to them that they don't have the right environment for me. So and that has been the key to my career success, right? Like to make sure I'm working for the right leader, because they're not just my boss or mentors, they have also become my advocates and allies. As an example, I've once worked with a leader. On my first week, I got offered another opportunity, and even I just started working with them and I mentioned that I'm not even contemplating, I just heard about it. They were the ones who kind of pushed me, and I was not even thinking I'm ready for it. So it's really important to have people around you who believes in you more than sometimes you would believe in yourself, because I feel like as women, and we can all relate, it's like sometimes we are our biggest critique.
Mm.
So sometimes it helps to have that kind of support. And lastly, always be an open communicator. One of the things that was brought up on the last webinar or the event was like, don't let anyone dim your light. Like always shine, doesn't like, even when it scares you, always speak up respectfully, but always speak up, and share what's full to you. My personal journey has been full of struggles, and it did make me a stronger human. I don't think it should be uh, this tough for everyone. I think the more we work together and have platforms like this, has networks like this, right? Like we support each other. I think eventually we are gonna get there, and it's not gonna be just a numbers game. We'll actually see true difference in the culture. Thank you, Shivan.
Menas, thank you so much. A really great way for us to start, because I think you've brought in lots of issues that resonate. We've already had questions coming in while you've been speaking, but you've raised, for example, not just being a woman, but the intersectionality issues as well. So a minority as well, in other ways, and how that's played out. The importance of work-life balance, but also, do you have to give up certain things? Can you do it a different way? Can you do it your way? Be authentic, not maybe do it the way that people have traditionally done things. And then I really like what you said at the end, the things that have helped you. So having mentors, being selective about the opportunities, looking after your well-being, working with allies, and constant communication. So lots of things for us to reflect on. Thanks so much, Menas. Alice, I saw you nodding to a lot of what Menas was saying. I'm coming over to you now.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah, there's so many bits that really resonate, because I think that there is that expectation that women are going to be slightly more amenable or slightly more flexible, or honestly, there's a kind of undercurrent that women are expected to sacrifice just that little bit more. So there's quite a few things there that resonated. In terms of my journey, I would say in lots of ways I've been very lucky. So for most of my career, I feel like my voice has mostly been quite well heard. I've been well received. I've generally been considered to be quite competent, but I would say for a significant chunk of my early career, I was seen as being just the admin. So being able to multitask and keep track of lots of priorities and understand how things fitted together, instead of that being seen as leadership qualities or strategic insight, or any of those things, which you can't guarantee that if I was a man, they would have seen it that way, but it is more likely that they would have done. I was sort of typecast as being this very well-performing, high-performing admin. And there's absolutely nothing against administrative roles. They are the glue that makes everything work. But it was one of those things that I kind of got to a position where I was wanting to do more and wanting to stretch myself more. And people kept sort of, whenever I said that, they were like, oh, well, maybe you could become an executive PA. And I was thinking, well, yes, I probably could. But also, it might be quite nice to aim for a job where I would have an executive PA. Like, why is that not being suggested? Why is that not being put forward? So, in some ways, as I say, I felt like I had quite a blessed experience. I haven't very often had that kind of sensation of someone just not hearing me or not listening to me. But the context of where they saw me and what journey they expected me to go on felt like it was quite limited, or certainly more limited. And I think something that I spoke to Siobhan a bit about before we came onto this is, I think there's this really interesting intersection between what leadership should look like and people then recognizing what leadership is when it looks like quite narrow definition of leadership in quite a male dominated way. So there's a whole range of characteristics and personality traits and behaviors which typically are, and also not all men, it's probably white middle class men, to be honest, but there's a particular form of leadership which is kind of considered the gold standard. And I think a lot of women have been encouraged, and I was as well at various points, that if you want to go forward and if you want to succeed and if you want to be taken seriously, you have to model yourself as closely as possible with the communication style and the behaviors and the approaches that leaders have, without really talking about what the people that they were talking about were men. And I don't actually want to be a mock-up of a man. I want to be a woman who's bringing my experiences and my knowledge and my kind of skills and attributes to leadership. But I feel really strongly that it should be a female form of leadership. I am a woman in a leadership role. I'm not trying to become a man. And I think, again, the numbers can sometimes skew that, because there are a lot of women who have felt like they had to sort of morph their personalities in some way to fit that mold. And then because those views and those opinions and those ways of doing things are the ones that get heard, it's still quite a male dominated debate and voice and opinions that are being shared at those top tables. So you definitely see that there are those kind of very senior boards where, and I think it is shifting now, I do really think it is shifting, but that there has historically been an expectation that the women there effectively are going to try and behave as much as possible like men. So I'm really keen in, and again, there was bits of what you were saying that really resonated in terms of being told that you have to compromise, you can't have a life outside of work. And, you know, I've been a trustee for a very long time, and honestly, I'm not willing to sacrifice that for my professional career. It's not something that's on the table and up for grabs. So either there's a form of leadership that I can do while honouring that, and those things that are really important to me, or it's not a form of leadership I'm willing to do. So I think there's a space there for just role modeling a slightly different way of doing it and not having to fit that mold that other people make for you. And quite specifically for the NHS in terms of healthcare, there's really good evidence that says that actually the diversity or lack thereof at decision-making level impacts health inequalities. So you absolutely, you know, it filters down. It really matters that we have that diversity of thinking, diversity of opinions, diversity of experience. It's not just a nice to have tick box exercise. Actually, it's really crucial if we're going to make good decisions that support people to be healthy. So it's probably, having those views is probably not going to make me rocket to the top, and I'm okay with that. But it's that sort of form of leadership, and also role modeling a different form of leadership for men as well. So they also get these messages that there's quite a narrow form of leadership that is right. And again, I feel quite strongly that actually modeling that for men and women, that you can do things a different way, and it doesn't always have to be the same. It feels really important. In the NHS, we have a lot more women in the workforce than we do men. So particularly, so in the bit that I'm in, which is NHS England, which is sort of the coordinating section of it all rather than the frontline delivery, we have something like 75% of the workforce is female. But again, as you go up, it gets to being, it's still mostly women. The whole way through, it is more women than men. But when you get to the higher paid, more influential roles, the ratios really, really shift. So instead of it being sort of 75%-ish women, it gets to being about 60% women. So it's quite a different shift. And in those lower paid jobs, you get hardly any men. So there's this pattern where men start higher up and then kind of occupy that more influential, higher paid roles rather than the more junior roles that aren't as well paid and don't have quite the same amount of influence. But having said that, we're now in a position where we have a female CEO, and we also have a female Secretary of State for Health. So we're in, I don't think that's ever been the case before. So we're now in this kind of space where we're starting to see those really, really senior roles being taken by women. And I'm quite excited to see where that takes us and what that will mean in the future, and how things unfold.
Alice, thank you so much. Really interesting to end on that note. So what is the impact going to be of having those two women right at the top of the NHS kind of governance structures? But so many things, again, that you picked up there, echoing, I think, what Mehnaz had said about the importance of authenticity. But I like the way as well that you phrase it, that we need women to role model a different type of leadership. So not trying to be, I think what you said, I don't want to be a mock-up of a man, like we can do this differently. And also, which I think prompted question, I'm not quite sure if you said this first, or we have a question from Nick, so we've got some men, I think, in the audience as well, where you're saying that men can also change, so maybe that style of leadership hasn't been doing them the best either. So we've got some questions about that kind of thing coming in as well. But also what that is all leading to, as you said, is that even though we're getting women up into these roles, that conversation at the top is still very male dominated. And for things like healthcare, that has an impact on the policy decisions. If you don't have diversity at the top, you're not going to have the best possible policy results ultimately at the end either. Thank you so much, Alice. Again, lots, and we're getting questions coming in, which is great to see. Zukiswa, we are coming over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the colleagues from GGF. I'm excited to be a part of this panel for the second time in 2 years running. And I look forward to fruitful, insightful, and productive discussions with other women in the public service across the world. So funny enough, when Manuel and Alice spoke about the typecasting that exists when it comes to gender roles in public service, it's something that I could particularly relate to. And that's because whenever I speak about my political ambitions for the future, many people are always saying to me, Suzuki, you're great, you're amazing, you're smart, you're intelligent, you're competent, you're beautiful. But I see you as a minister, as a deputy minister, or I see you as a deputy president, but never the president of the republic. And I've always asked myself, like, I see myself as the president of the republic one day, and perhaps the first woman to occupy the leadership role as a woman in South Africa in the near future. But even men, both men and women, they always typecast you as a deputy, as an administrator, as a PA, and they never see you as being the leader of leaders in the fortes and the platforms that you actually seek to represent women in, both in the near and in the far future. And also, secondly, when I was listening to Alice and Minaz, when they were reflecting about their own personal experiences, today I had an opportunity to lead a cluster meeting with one of the ministers of social development in my country. And usually when I attend meetings with the deputy president or ministers or the president himself, I'm accompanied by the chairperson, who's a male. But for the first time today, he couldn't make the meeting, and I had to lead my own cluster meeting because I'm the cluster head and cluster commissioner responsible for social development. And in my head, I was saying to myself, why am I feeling like a lightweight? A sense of self-doubt because the chairperson of the Public Service Commission is not in attendance. So I also think that the limitations that we impose on ourselves as women, which might or might not be imposed by our external environment, but we also have to overcome the anxieties and limitations we impose on ourselves in order for us to become effective leaders in society. And just because my chairperson wasn't there, who's the male elder figure, because I'm the youngest commissioner that I've ever had in the lifeline of the Public Service Commission. And I'm the first woman in the chairmanship as deputy chairperson. So just because a chairman who was older and a male wasn't there, all of a sudden, no matter how well I tried to perform, in my own head, as I was reflecting on my performance, I felt like a lightweight. So we need to overcome those personal internal limitations and make sure that we occupy our seats around the table, take up our spaces, and basically lead, because women can lead effectively, efficiently, fruitfully, insightfully. It's not because of our gender dynamics that we are limited. Is because society expects less of us than what they expect of men. So those were my brief reflections as I was reflecting on our discussions today. But when I look at the barriers that women face and come up against and have had to overcome as women in the public service, there's some personal insights that I have about the common challenges, as well as some general insights. And I think the biggest of those insights is the issue of gender bias and the stereotypes that women face in the workplace, not just in the public service, but in corporates across the world as well. So facing biases and stereotypes that suggest that women are less capable or less qualified than their male counterparts is something that we have to contend with as women. I have personally challenged these stereotypes by excelling in the roles that have been given to me, by seeking mentorship and coaching, and literally believing in my own madness and advocating for myself as a young woman Black leader in South African society. So building supportive networks of colleagues who can help me by breaking down these gender biases and gender stereotypes has really helped me a lot. Secondly, the issue of work-life balance is also an issue that we need to contend with as women, particularly bearing in mind that society also expects us to be superwomen in the households, in the kitchens, in the bedrooms, as we are superwomen in the workplace, in the public service. And I truly believe that we need to start having policies that support work-life balance and make sure that it's not just women responsible for child raising and child rearing, but men take up the responsibilities of being fathers as well as nurturing parents in the relationship in the household, so that women don't just take up the full responsibilities of just being the one parented nurturing parent in the household, but we have a situation where both men and women are parenting in the household. So work-life balance is extremely important. I've also witnessed a lack of representation in leadership positions, particularly in senior management. Even though South Africa has done particularly well in trying to improve the statistics when it comes to the representation of women in senior management positions. As we've already discussed in this panel, just because you are represented in the boardroom doesn't mean you enjoy equal voice and that your voice is taken seriously and that you enjoy equal decision-making powers in the boardroom. So we need to make sure that we conscientize and familiarize our colleagues to the need for inclusive leadership and inclusive teamwork and inclusive working in the workplace. And that it's actually a value in having diverse perspectives, diverse voices, and diverse views in the workplace in as far as achieving the mandate and the mission of our organizations, whether it be in corporate, which is the profit motive, or whether it be in the public service, which is a service motive. There's actually value in not just having representation in the workplace, but making sure that women also enjoy equal voices and equal opportunity to enjoy influence and decision-making power in the boardroom environment when it comes to leadership in the workplace. And I think most importantly for me is actually the issue of making sure that we provide coaching and networking opportunities and support networks for women we deem a high potential women to lead, and that we actually provide, we actively become their sponsors, also as women who are leading in spaces where men are in the majority, not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively in terms of how the space they enjoy to influence decision-making in the workplace. But lastly, something I would like to plead for is actually the issue of making sure that we engage our male colleagues to become feminists, and for our male colleagues to become allies for gender representation and gender parity in the public service, because it does actually accrue beneficial results and rewards, not just for themselves as people, because they then remove the burden of toxic masculinity from their lives, but it actually benefits the organization more holistically in terms of leadership and the direction that the organization actually takes. So I strongly believe that gender parity is the way of the future. And the more women we have in leadership positions in society, the better our world will be, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And that's why I'm a strong advocate for why and how women need to be at the center stage of leadership in the public service.
Kiswa, thank you so much. I knew we'd see that passion again. I really like the way you ended there about if we engage male colleagues to become feminists and allies, it's good for them as well, because it removes that toxic masculinity, not just from the workplace, but from their personal lives as well. And the whole of society is going to benefit from that. Lots of things as well, as you say, resonating from the others that we've heard already. So I think all of you touched on the importance of coaching, of networking, of women sponsoring other women and becoming kind of this community, support community for others. But also, as you were saying as well, that in in South Africa, you've got more and more women getting into those senior positions, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have equal power and equal voice to their male colleagues. And only real equality comes when you have that true valuing of diversity in those roles. And also touching on what Menaz had said as well about the work-life balance issue, and how do we make sure that men carry the responsibility outside the workplace as well as within the workplace, because as much as we are super women, we need men to be doing their fair share as well. Thank you so much, everybody. There's so much in there. I've written down so many great quotes from all of you, which I'm sure we'll be putting in the article that we send around afterwards, but we've got lots and lots of questions coming in already. So I'm going to head over to those. The first question that came in, I think, was from, I think it's Al or AL, I'm not sure. But this is a question really about, it says that the evidence shows that a one-size-fits-all approach to kind of promotion and gender equality doesn't fit everybody. And I think, Men, as you were talking as well, and Zakiswa, you touched on this about being not just a woman, but a Black woman in a kind of multicultural society. There are lots of issues at play there. And Alice, you were saying quite often it's the kind of white middle-class men who set the kind of context. So how do we kind of get a more nuanced approach then? How do we make sure that we have things in place that help everybody in their individual authentic selves? Menaz, I'll come back to you because we haven't heard from you for a while on this one.
Yes, I did actually post a reply, but I think what I essentially says was, even though there's data that already exists that tells us what we should be doing where we should be focusing on, but at the same time, it's important to understand that we are kind of faced with legacy and traditional systems and challenges, right? So there is a huge change management component, even though the data there exists. Even I found through my journey, like even successful women in senior leadership roles are sometimes believers because they have been part of the system for so long. So it's, even though we have the data, we have the information that already exists, I think what we need to do is collectively work towards a more systematic change. And how we can do that is having more representation of diverse groups in those roles, and especially in the leadership positions, and using them to kind of push this forward. But at the same time, I'm also a big believer that you can like initiate or inspire change at any level. So sharing those data within your surrounding, generating conversation, like open dialogue, I would say be a start.
Thanks, Menaz. Alice, your thoughts on this particular question?
I think it's a bit of a micro and macro at the same time, is the way I'm thinking about it. So I think from that kind of individual relationships point of view, so I was talking to a colleague yesterday about job opportunities and things that are available. And I was saying to her, look, don't underestimate your capabilities. You are able to do that job. And she's like, oh, I wasn't going to necessarily go for it, but you know me very well, and you're saying that I would be able to do it. Now I'm going to seriously consider it. And we've had conversations like that in the past, been a few things where I've been like, don't underestimate your abilities, give it a go, put yourself forward. And she's now seeking out other women and saying the same thing, and finding that, there were people who weren't going to go for jobs. And she's like, no, look, you really have got the skills. And a lot of men don't feel like they need to have all the skills before they go for a job. They feel like they can, I think there's statistics around it, if they think they can do about 75% or maybe even 50%, they're like, oh, I'll figure the rest out when I get there. Whereas women are much more likely to want to be doing 80-90% of it already before they apply. So I think there's that micro level where you can really have a big impact just talking to individuals and saying, look, I think you can do that. And I'm not buttering you up. I really think you can do it. But then I think there is also the policy level macro stuff that has to change. So one of the things that's come in at NHS England relatively recently is a very, very robust flexible working policy. So it allows that broader range of people to be able to come and bring their best selves to work. And actually those logistical things that get in the way of a whole range of people being able to engage makes a massive difference. So starting to systematically break down some of those barriers at a macro level, but individually taking those conversations to people and saying, look, are you underselling yourself? Because I think most women do.
Alice, I just want to, on that flexible working, because this is an issue that's come up in webinars in the past. Is there a danger, though, actually, that with hybrid working, more people doing a mix, that actually women might fall behind again because they tend to be the ones that are going to spend more time at home because they've got those caring responsibilities. Men will tend to be the ones that are more present in the office. They're going to be seen more by the bosses and again get more promotion chances. Is that a risk that you're aware of?
I think it absolutely is a risk. One of the things that I would say is actually very good about the flexible working policy they brought in is it doesn't just look at that dynamic. So it looks at a whole range of different things. So the idea is that there's probably about half a dozen different elements of your work that you can put in an application for having adjusted. So it could be compressed hours, it could be adjusted hours, it could be seasonal to work in with like school terms, so you have different hours in school holidays compared to not school. So there's a whole range of things, and they do also talk about that inequality that can be generated by having certain people in the office in person having informal chats and knowing what's going on versus the people at home who aren't. We're not there, it's not perfect by any means, but I have seen it make quite a difference to people because it has meant that, again, it doesn't have to be that binary choice of supporting your family or coming to work. It's about finding that mid-ground for men and women. And again, I think that's really important because there's a lot of men who do want to be more involved in their children's lives, but honestly, they haven't really been given permission to do that. So it's not a magic wand, but I do think having a really practical support structure in place really helps.
Thanks. So Kiswa, we've got lots of questions coming in, so I want to ask you a different question. And this is coming from Melissa. And Melissa has said, sometimes diversity targets, so like having quotas and targets, are a bit of a double-edged sword because some people think that you're just hiring a woman to fill a quota, not because they're the best person for the job. So what do you think about quotas? Do you think they are a good thing or do you think they're a bad thing?
So I think quotas are definitely a good thing in terms of ensuring representation of minority groups in the boardroom and in senior management structures without targeted quotas and targeted numbers for how many women we have in the boardroom. Chances are we wouldn't have those women in the boardroom because of patriarchy and the cultures from which we come and the cultures from which we emerge and find ourselves in. So in terms of representation and ensuring that women have a seat around the table, that's important for me to have quotas. But quotas are not sufficient. You also need to have cultural shifts in the working place environment to make sure that the working place environment is inclusive and allows the voices of diversity, not just women, but Black women and young women and LGBTIQ members of society, women, people who are considered as minority groups in society. So inclusivity, nurturing and building cultures of inclusive voices and inclusivity and diversity, it remains as equally important as the quotas. So it's a number of a number of hybrid of solutions that we're proposing on the table. It's not just quotas, but also ensuring that there's a cultural shift in the workplace environment that allows for a diversity of voices to be heard and to enjoy influence, not just in the boardroom, but in society as well, because it allows for organizational effectiveness and efficiencies.
So what would you say to people who criticize quotas by saying, well, you're not getting there on your merit, you're getting there because you're a woman or you're an ethnic minority? What would your response to that be?
I think it's a combination of both. We're not just saying hire a woman because someone has a genitalia. That's not what quotas or affirmative action is about. What we're saying is that in a situation where you have a man and a woman of equal merit and equal competency, choose the woman because the diversity of voices will better equip and enable and empower the organization to achieve organizational goals and organizational mandate. That's what affirmative action quotas are about. Yes.
Thanks, Kiswa. Mehnaz, you were nodding in agreement there. What are your thoughts on diversity targets?
I share actually the same thoughts as well. And for me, I feel like, and I've received this kind of comments so often that there's two components to it. So first, I think battling again with my own self when I'm faced with a situation like this, I have begun to like question my own ability. So there's that component. Because in Canada, like we have to kind of fill out that questionnaire whenever we change jobs and stuff. Like, what do you identify? Whenever I do that, it's like, is that part of a reasons I did face that myself. The other component is when it someone asks or opens a conversation like that, it actually is good in a sense. Like there might be some hurt towards it, but it's an opportunity to open conversation and actually educate them about why it's right. Sometimes conversation won't go the like right way, but at least majority of the time from my experience, it has actually turned into like positive, where I was able to change the mindset of the individual making such remarks. Because as Jukis was already mentioned, like quotas are very much important, and it's not like quotas are filled based on your like background or gender, but it's actually like choosing the right candidate, but making sure that we have better representation.
Thanks, Mehnaz. Alice, feel free to answer that question if you like on targets, but I do want to move on as well to Nick's question. So I'm going to pose this to you first, Alice, which is, and this comes back to all of you have kind of touched on the importance, I think, of male allies and changing the male culture as well. So Nick has said, what can male colleagues do to help improve conditions for women? Creation of barriers that limit half of our available resources and ideas have to be broken down, but this would be better achieved by being a united front that promotes diversity that should be available to all of us. So this is a man who wants to help. I'm assuming, sorry, Nick, I'm assuming this is a man that sent in this question. It might not be, but my assumption is this is. What can men actually do very practically? What would we like them to do? Alice, your thoughts first.
So I think going back to what I said before in terms of that mentorship and calling people out. So if you have female colleagues that you think are due a promotion, tell them, have that conversation, sit down with them and say, look, I see you acing this. And I don't know if you realize, because it changes the dynamic, it changes the conversation, it shifts things into a different space. Also, the other end of the spectrum, if you see your colleagues being spoken over, please do stop the conversation and say, I don't know if you realize, but you just spoke over that person. Like there are ways of kind of bringing that attention and just shifting the ratio of voices that are heard. But it will mean a huge amount to your colleagues that you have sat them down and said, look, I think you're acing this. Like just starting that conversation, getting it going, and calling out bad behavior. The calling out bad behavior thing is tricky. Like it's tricky to do it in a way that feels comfortable because it's not a comfortable thing. It's not probably going to feel comfortable. If it felt comfortable, we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. And I think slightly linking onto that previous question again in terms of the quotas, because it's a bit of an overlap of thought for me. When people talk about quotas and say, oh, well, you're only there because you're a woman, or if you're only there because you're black, or you're only there because you hit something, people don't, when you have a board that is entirely men between a certain age bracket, and they get someone else on that board, which basically looks the same as everyone else, you don't get them having questions saying, oh, are you just there because you look the same as all the rest of them? And actually, we need to be asking those questions. We need to be saying, where there is that uniformity and there is that lack of diversity, that's what we need to be questioning. That's the bit where we need to go, well, that looks a bit weird. Because that's not the way the world looks. The world looks really mixed up and different. And then this little bit of it is completely uniform. And that's the weird bit. That's the bit that we should probably be calling out. Unconscious bias means that'll just keep happening if we don't have quotas.
Yeah.
What we're aiming for is not needing them because it's happening naturally, but we're not there yet. So I think for those who do want to be allies, big up the women in your life. And then, if you've got it in you, call out the bad behaviours, even if it's just the little ones.
Thanks. Zukiswa, and then I will ask you, Mehnaz, what would you like to see men doing?
I think
for me, I would agree with Alice when she says men need to be allies to women by encouraging more women to step up and to be at the forefront of the leadership opportunities that do avail themselves to them. But most importantly for me, it is about calling out bad behavior and making sure that you use your voice in ways that favor women who are competent, who need to be more empowered, and women who have the capacity to lead. So especially when it comes to discrimination, things like sexual harassment, and all the negative experiences that a woman face in the workplace, if you can use your voice to call out bad behavior for what it is, and to bring about a sense of consciousness amongst your male counterparts and male peers, that is something that I would definitely appreciate as a woman in the workplace.
Yeah.
I also think so. It's an issue of other making sure that you add more chairs to the table to allow women to enjoy representation and to enjoy partnership and enjoy inclusivity, or even to a point of self-sacrificing yourself. If you have an opportunity where you feel like another woman is better, would better perform than you, despite the gender differences, sacrifice the chair because of your beliefs and your conviction for feminism and the right of women to lead in society. So we also need a level of self-sacrificing in the workplace as a show of confidence that women can indeed do it, and women can indeed lead in society, in the boardrooms, in the workplace.
So I love that. So we have already 3 things, I think, between you, Alice and Zikiswa. So kind of call out bad behavior, boost women's confidence by telling them when they're doing a good job. And then I love this self-sacrifice. So if you think there's a woman that can do it better or as well as you, let them have that opportunity. Mehnaz, is there anything you can add for Nick? What else might men do that could help?
I think Alice and Zikiswa covered the workplace part of it, but I also think like we also need to kind of push and educate the men who are in our own surrounding, like friends, family.
Yeah.
Because they play a big role too in ensuring that they're picking up the household chores, right? They're equally contributing to the home so that us women can equally contribute in the workplace. So I think that much I've seen that experience that with my own partner, and I feel like wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have that kind of support. So I think it always starts with home and then the workplace to find a good balance.
And interesting what you said, Mehnaz, because that isn't necessarily easy, especially if you come from a culture where women are expected to take a bit of a back role. So that isn't necessarily the easiest part of all of this. Fantastic. We've got lots more questions coming in. So this builds on that point. I think this came in from, Ty Davies, who said, how do you build your own voice and presence in a mainly male-dominated space so that you don't fade into the background? I love this question because I think we've all said, and you've all touched on, sometimes all of you have felt a lack of confidence. You felt anxious. At the same time, you need to step up. And I think, Zikiswa, you said, fill the space, be your own kind of advocate. How do you actually do that in that moment? What advice would you give to women when they want to speak up, but maybe their confidence is just struggling a little bit? Alice, I'll start with you on this one.
So I'd say it's going to sound weird. There are literal tips and hints that you can do. So Amy Cuddy's TED Talk is amazing. I don't know if anyone's watched it already, but if you haven't, go and watch it. And do a power pose in the toilet before you're going into a meeting where you think you might be a bit nervous. It sounds ridiculous. There's good science behind it, though. Give it a go. And practice what you're going to say. Take those moments when you can speak, and if people talk over you or don't, just interrupt them and say, I'm sorry, I think you thought I'd finished and I hadn't.
Yeah, we can share the link to that TED Talk, Alice. We'll connect with you afterwards and make sure that everybody that's registered, we can share a link to that. Mehnaz, you're nodding. Does that resonate with you, some of those tips?
Yes, it does. To that, I'd also like to add, build your allies from within. So what I've usually done, like one of the strategies for building my presence, is whenever I go to a new workplace or even working in a new project, I try to like set up some one-on-ones or coffee chats with senior leaders or colleagues, just to have that one-on-one interaction. That way you feel, or I have felt confident or comfortable, because I get to know people at a personal level. when you build those connections, it gets easier when you're a big boardroom and trying to present. You already have people kind of who knows you a little bit about you, and you'll see them nodding, and you'll also be able to tell who are not when you talk with them one-on-one. So I feel like things like that, like it takes extra effort a little bit, but it helps you build that voice and presence and people to know you a little bit more than what you bring as a working woman.
Thanks, Menez. And Zukiswa, what advice would you give?
I think for me, don't be afraid to go the extra mile. I think as Menaz is saying, go and set up that one-on-one session with your CEO or with the director general or your minister, your prime minister. Don't be afraid to show up, to show off, and to make sure that you represent your the best version of yourself in every interaction and every engagement and every opportunity you come across. I think for me, though, what's really worked very well is the fact that because I'm learned, I've got 2 master's degrees, I'm doing a PhD. Once I become a doctor and a professor, people don't have a choice but to mind my business, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So don't be afraid to build on your capabilities and competencies through training programs, mentorship programs, sponsorship programs. Build as much social street cred as you can in the boardroom, for the boardroom, as much as you can, because it literally will give you a higher level of leverage than what you would enjoy if you were just an ordinary person with a basic bachelor's degree.
Yeah. I like the way you said that. I saw something yesterday about the fact that women tend to be a bit more humble than men, and they wait for people to spot their talent rather than explaining what their talent is. So I like the way you phrased it there. Don't just show up. You show up and you show off. Obviously, you have to do that in balance.
Humility,
but I think,
balance, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We've got great other questions coming in here. So, and I think this one is connected as well, and especially Menez, I'll come to you first on this. It's a bit like what you said, actually. Chantel has said, all of you have mentioned the importance of mentors or building those supportive networks. What's the best way to find mentors, especially if you're in a new workplace or you're a female in a workplace that isn't supportive? So any tips on finding mentors? I guess this varies depending on where you are. Some places might have schemes in place that are very clear. Others, you might have to kind of build that yourself. Menez, your experience.
Can I answer that, Joban? I think
yeah,
for me,
sure.
What I've actually decided to do now is to actively procure the services of a coach, someone that who I would pay on a meeting by meeting basis to discuss my career aspirations and how I go about navigating the world environment and the work environment in order for me to get there. Sometimes organizations don't have programs or schemes that allow for a natural attrition or a natural navigation towards a coach or a mentor. So if you have to pay for it and actually invest in it by procuring the services of an external coach and mentor, then don't be afraid to do so. And that's what I've begun to do ever so recently.
Okay, interesting. So if there's not a mentoring scheme or it's not a good one, then you've gone down the external kind of paying for a coach route. Menez, and then I'll come to you, Alice, on this as well. Any tips on maybe mentors? You might not be able to pay, I guess, for a coach, but any tips on mentors?
For sure. I think adding to what Zukiswa said, if you have someone if you have programs within your organization, if you have a directory, reach out to people. Doesn't matter if it's a CEO. But I found, especially if you don't have like a supportive environment in the workplace, I found the best way to find mentors is LinkedIn. Yes, LinkedIn has been one of, it's a great social platform. And I always tell people, even those I'm coaching, is if you're not a social media person and you don't use any social media, that's okay. But try to use LinkedIn as much, because you can reach to any people from any organization, right? Like you can even message someone from Google or like any organization in the world and ask for mentorship or ask to have a coffee chat. And don't hesitate if people doesn't reply to you. Like I know I have reached out to so many people throughout my career. Some, like majority, won't reply to you, but it's those who does truly counts, and they will make.
So I guess don't be afraid to ask is the first thing, isn't it? Try it, and you might be surprised by the response. Alice, your thoughts on mentoring? Because I think you mentioned something in the NHS mentoring
Yeah,
scheme.
so we have quite a formalized mentoring program, and it is very good. What I have found though is that it's good for certain things and not everything. So I think try that, but it's not going to be your one size fits all solution. I'd also encourage people to look for mentors potentially outside their workplace. So if you're in a kind of slightly toxic environment where you're feeling like, actually, I don't want to have a mentor in this environment because actually I don't want to replicate what I'm seeing, talk to your personal networks, talk to people that your friends, your family, ask them about the culture in their organization. Either ask them to mentor you or ask if they know someone in their organization who might be able to mentor you. Because there's, as I think both of you have said, it doesn't have to be someone in your own sector. It doesn't have to be someone in your own organization. It needs to be someone who inspires you. It needs to be someone whose views you respect and that you want to kind of learn from and you want to be more like. So if you're looking inside your own organization, even if there is a formal mentoring thing, if they're not someone who you really admire and want to learn from, you're probably not going to get
So
the
on
value
that
from it.
note, Alice, in this context, does it have to be a woman, your mentor?
No, I don't think so. Absolutely not. And I think for me, so what broke the pattern for me of going from an admin role to more of a kind of strategic role was I was a PA for somebody and they came in new from another sector and they were like, Alice, why are you a PA? And I was like, I've been wondering that. And he's like, we need to get you a new job title. This is ridiculous. I need to send you into meetings and it's not going to make any sense if you've got PA as a job. So he was the one who kind of took the ball by the horns and was like, this is weird. I don't really understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for that. And it shifted, just that job title shift meant a whole load of other things were possible. But I think the thing is your mentor needs to be someone who you find inspiring and that you are interested in their view and their way of doing things. If you don't have that click, and that can be the problem with the formal stuff, is that you don't always get a lot, you don't quite get as much of that feeling out of somebody before you sign up to having a mentoring relationship with them. So I've had mentors through that have been amazing, but I've also had mentors where I'm like, I mean, it's fine.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things is don't think, you can try a few mentors, it might not all work, or they might work for specific periods in your career. It's not like it has to be a one
or multiple people
forever.
At the same time for different aspects that you want, I know no one's going to have all the answers, but it's about finding that person that gives you a bit of a spark of drive of wanting to push forward and makes you kind of go, oh yeah, I am going to do that. It's that person. And that could be almost anybody, and it might not be someone more senior necessarily as well. I think that's another thing to really think about, is that it's about that spark, not about necessarily hierarchical structures.
Great. We're going to go to Amy's question. Amy's sent in her question, actually one of the first questions that came in, but I think I've left it a little bit, so I think this is quite a difficult question because it kind of gets to the heart of a lot of things, I think. So Amy's question is, how do we persuade policymakers to take qualitative and quantitative barriers to women's advancement seriously when many look only at recruitment numbers to entry-level roles, which can really mask the glass ceiling, and when women who speak up are branded as, she's put Karens, and then dismissed? So I think this is about, how do you get organizations to really look at the cultural issues that are going on and not just the numbers? So some of those barriers and obstacles that women face all the time, how do you actually get organizations to look at those and not just look at those kind of hard numbers? So Kiswa, I'm going to come to you because you've talked a lot about the actual culture. How do we get organizations to actually change?
So I think by understanding that there's actually a business case for why women need to be in leadership positions. It's not about just doing women a favor because it's the nice thing or the right thing to do. There's actually a strong business case, a profit business case for corporates, and a service orientation for governments in terms of equality and making sure that the policy outcomes we seek to achieve are realized by enhancing the equality of society. So by understanding that, by having more and more women lead in society, lead in the boardroom, lead in the workplace, you actually are allowing yourselves and empowering yourselves and building the capabilities to achieve organizational objectives, organizational mandates, and organizational missions. So there's a
Yeah.
business case for diversity. It's not just about being nice or just
Yeah.
about being kind or just being right or politically correct. There's actually
Yeah.
a strong business case for why more and more women need to take up the responsibilities to lead in society.
So again, it's maybe not ignoring one set of data, it's actually understanding the other bit of data that's telling you there is a strong business case for this and you need to be looking at why
The
it's so important.
benefits.
Yeah, that we
The
do this.
benefits.
Yeah. Alice, your thoughts on these kind of really ingrained, biases and prejudices in the system? How do we get organizations to change those?
I totally agree with Zakiya. There's a good business case. It makes good business sense to have that level of diversity and representation. In the health sector, as I said earlier on, it drives our health outcomes for the whole population. It's really important stuff. I think that needs to be part of the argument, but I think you also need champions. You need to find 1, 2, 3 people who are willing to get the bit between their teeth and be the spokesperson and the voice for it. And if I'm completely honest, I would use any means you can to get them really passionate. So whatever their thing is, everyone's got a thing, right? Whatever their thing is that makes them tick and makes them go, yes, this is what I'm going to find that thing, because there will be data to support that it will, whatever their thing is, there will be data to support it, because companies that have diverse boards have more profit, they have better staff retention, they have more quality, they have like higher quality products. Everything goes up when you have more diversity. Like, it's over and over and over again. But it's about finding that couple of people and linking into what's their passion, what's their thing that really drives them, and then making it their mission, their kind of voice that they're wanting to push forward.
Thanks.
And again,
Alice.
that can be a man or a woman.
Yeah. Mehnaz, you've been, I think, in violent agreement with that. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, I would like to add that one other thing that has worked with me for me was like sharing knowledge and articles. So when you go to an event like this, when you have like some data or some sort of information, right? Like the TED Talk, what I would do is I would share with my colleagues, with my leaders, with whoever I can, because at the end of the day, I feel like small steps will go a long way, and you need to kind of consistently persuade their thought process if you really want to see that cultural change. And sharing what exists outside helps a lot.
Yeah. Thanks, Mehnaz. I genuinely don't know the breakdown of our audience. I was assuming there are more women in the audience today than men, but we definitely have a few men in the audience. And I just want to read out, because I think it's really nice, from Mike Koppler, who said to all of you, just a compliment. I love your convictions. Please continue to promote yourselves. Remember the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, so make yourselves known. So Mike is doing exactly, I think, what we've said, is kind of telling you all how great you are today, which I completely support.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and Edwy has also backed that up by saying this has been an inspiring and informative talk. So thank you to all of you. On that, we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to put both these questions, and you can answer one or both. This will be the final thing that I put to you. So Megan has asked, how do you continue to lift women in your workplace as you yourselves are given new opportunities and as you grow? So as you get higher and higher up, how will you continue to support the women around you? And AL again has said, and I think this is an inclusion question, back to what you were talking about. I think all of you have touched on this. Due to kind of increasing rates of disability, including among young women, what should organisations do to create more inclusive workplaces? So I think it's broadening out. How do we make sure when we're talking about equality, we're not just talking about women, we might be talking about women with maybe particular issues, with disability issues, but also just generally, how do we make an inclusive workplace? You can answer one or both of those questions, but it will have to be quite quick because we've only got a couple of moments left. Mehnaz, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I think I can touch a little bit on both. So for the one where how do you lift women in your workplace, I think that's where I got the inspiration to start my own consultancy and then get acquainted with other organizations, and also within my workplace try to offer like coaching and mentorship. So there's that aspect, but also finding other networks within the organization that are doing the same. So for example, if your organization doesn't have a mentoring network, I don't think anything should be stopping you from starting one, right? And this comes to the first question as well, like how do you create a more inclusive workplace? I think you can start if you see that there's not policies like good accommodation in place, or there's not a network that are pushing for this, start it yourself.
Thanks, I love that. So if it's not there, do it yourself. There's nothing stopping you doing it yourself. Alice, your thoughts on helping others and inclusivity?
So I think helping others, as I said, those personal connections reinforce that people are doing a good job, really encourage people. I often try to encourage, so the people that I've managed over the years, I've encouraged them to think of their next step and their future as being more senior than me. Not necessarily as more senior than me forever, but like, don't think of where I am now as anyone else's glass ceiling, because I'm not thinking of it as my glass ceiling, and you need to not as well. But I think the diversity thing around disabilities is really important. So the stats that I was talking about in terms of it's not quite a glass ceiling, because we still have more women at all levels, but the ratios change. It's about the same point for racial diversity and disabilities as well. So there is a real tipping point where we start seeing similar sorts of groups of people really diminishing away. So I think it's about, don't have the conversations, don't shy away from those conversations. People get really uncomfortable and embarrassed and awkward. And it means that people don't want to talk about the difficulties they have as a disabled person, because again, they don't want to think that that's the only reason they got the job. All the stuff that we've talked about for women applies to people with disabilities and people from a whole range of different backgrounds. So in NHS at the moment, we're just starting to talk a bit more about neurodiversity, and that's a huge area where people do not get the representation that they should. Have those conversations, raise those topics, try to be the person who brings the conversation into the room, and just hold it as being something normal.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. So much good there. The importance of communication, then I think you're saying have those conversations, really important. Zukiswa, I'm going to give the final words to you on both of these questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I think for me, one thing I've always prioritized as I've risen up the ladder as a young woman and a Black woman in the public service in South Africa is the issue of raising people as you rise. So I'm intentional about mentorship and coaching the younger generation of public service within my communities where I find myself, to the point that I actually have structured programs with my mentees, about 5 of them at the moment, where we discuss about vision and mission boarding, and where we see ourselves in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and the kind of support they require for them to achieve their dreams and lifelong purposes. So I'm quite intentional about raising as I rise, because the boardroom can be a very lonely experience if you're the only woman in the boardroom. So the more women we bring to the boardroom environment and in leadership positions, the better it is, even for us as the people who find ourselves in top management, to make sure that we're not alone, and that you quantify and qualify the voices of women in society. And in terms of making sure that there's broader inclusivity, including about persons with disability and minority groups like your LGBTIQ or your queer societies, I strongly believe in having equal opportunity employment policies in the workplace, whereby you can implement and enforce policies that will promote equal opportunities for all employees, irrespective of gender or disability or sexual orientation. This includes fair hiring practices, promotions, and training opportunities. So actually having equal opportunity employment policies is a prerequisite for a more inclusive workplace environment. Coupled with that is having diversity inclusion programs or diversity and inclusion programs, whereby organizations develop comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs that explicitly address gender disparities and disparities in disability and sexual orientation. These programs can include training sessions, workshops, and awareness campaigns to promote a more inclusive workplace environment and encourage a shift in the culture of the organization towards one that is diversity friendly and is actually inclusive. And even lastly, having recruitment and promotion practices which are gender, disability, or sexual orientation neutral. And this can even include having information on the people's CVs removed in their resumes, in the initial stages of evaluation that might actually discriminate against them. So having gender neutral, disability neutral, and sexual orientation neutral recruitment and promotion practices in the organization is also another way that you can actually promote inclusivity and diversity in the workplace. But most importantly for me is finding allies in the workplace and people who can actually champion the kind of new vision for the workplace, for the public service, for society that we envision for inclusivity and diversity in the workplace. And those are some broad thoughts about best practice. I would actually encourage in building a more inclusive and diverse work environment in the public service.
Lucas, well, thank you. So, I mean, some really practical things there that can be done across all those levels, right from kind of recruitment right up to the kind of promotion boards and everything, and the difference that will make to that culture that we're all trying to change. But what you said there about having great allies, all of you, the three of you, I mean, if we can have more people like you advocating for change in organizations, then I'm very optimistic that we are going to see some of the changes that we need. Sadly, we are out of time. I want to say a huge thanks to the audience for sending in such great questions. Thank you for that engagement and for sending in those questions. Thank you to our three speakers. I mean, that was just fantastic. This is actually the final webinar I'm doing this year. And I have to say, definitely one of my favorite webinars for this year. Thank you to the three of you for giving us your time, but for just being so open and honest with your answers and being so authentic. And you can see from some of the comments that we had in that the audience really enjoyed it. So thank you to all of you. I think on that final point about lifting other women, obviously the Global Government Forum new Global Women's Network is part of that, trying to help lift each other. And these kind of events are really aimed to do that. So what we will do is we'll share the link for that network along with the TED Talk and other things that we've mentioned to everybody that's registered, and they can share that then with their kind of networks. We want to get as many people as we can into this community. Thank you. We will have sent a questionnaire out to people who registered. If you could take a few minutes in the audience, if you could take a few minutes to fill in that questionnaire, we'd be hugely grateful, because it means we can continue to give you exactly the type of webinars that you find most useful for you. So thank you very much. To Alice, to Mehnaz, and to Zikiswa, honestly, we've got so many comments coming in saying thank you so much for this webinar. So I just want to repeat again, that was a brilliant webinar. I really enjoyed that discussion. We will send this video to everybody who registered. They can watch it again, share it with their colleagues, with their friends, and there will also be an article written in a week or so's time that we'll share with people that will cover the key issues. There's some brilliant quotes from all of you in there, so I'm really looking forward to reading that article as well when it comes out, and we can share that far as wide as well. To everybody, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. To our brilliant panel, thank you. And I wish everybody a very festive season, whether you are celebrating kind of Christmas or just taking a bit of a break over the next couple of weeks. Warm wishes from me, and hope to see you all again very soon in another one of our webinars in the new year. But to Alice, to Mehnaz, and to Zikiswa, thank you so much for today. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.